It all started with a broken laptop. It happens to a lot of people, but the fact that it happened to me, on that very day, at that very time, seemed like God was giving me the finger. I was 45 minutes away from holding my first ever public speech at a shareholder meeting, and all my notes were gone. The slideshow was uploaded and ready, but my speaking points had gone the way of Jimmy Hoffa. The IT guy, Armand, was frantically trying to work his magic, but it was going to be down to the wire. He had to stop to wipe his hands with wet wipes every few minutes or so, costing me precious seconds. I had cold sweat seeping through my corporate pantsuit. I reminded myself to keep my arms down so they couldn't see my sweat marks. My hair was already a mess, with long brown strands sticking to my cheek, no matter how straight I held my neck. "I'm sorry," said Armand. "The problem is the hard drive. Everything else works fine. I can put in a new one, get it to boot, but your files are gone." He threw up his hands in surrender, and I almost cried. I didn't want to do this damn presentation to begin with. "Good luck," he sighed. "I'll keep my eye out for a better one." I stepped out on stage with little to no prep, to a crowd of 460 of our most influential and prosperous investors. Everyone in that crowd could hire or fire 10 of me without batting an eye, but I was greeted with courteous applause and tired smiles, all veiled behind a blinding spotlight. The headset chafed against my ears. Finally, the slides came on, and I just winged it. It was awkward, earnest, and burned a hole straight through my stomach. I tasted stomach acid for the rest of the day. The moment I finished, I dashed off stage and locked myself in the bathroom for a solid 20 minutes. I could hear people coming to check on me, but Armand was quick to redirect them to get me some space. It was done, but I felt awful. And on top of all of that, I was still expected to appear for the after work. Drinks and smiles. Like I was supposed to pretend these people didn't practically own me. But it is what it is. I put on my fancy attire and suffered in silence. I was never that good with people. I was a sick kid who mostly played with words. My mom came from this small hippie compound in rural Minnesota, so she was used to having a small group to spend her time with. She didn't exactly encourage me to explore the wide world. I didn't just hear about stranger danger. I heard about razor blades and Halloween candy, rat poison sprinkled on wild raspberries, brain parasites in unfiltered rainwater, and that eating sunflower seeds would make you mentally ill, especially the blue ones. So, yeah, not really a people person. I still have this reaction to step back when someone approaches me. It's imprinted in me, like the steps to a dance. And my mom's ever-present worry solidified as this nagging voice in the back of my head, ready to bring me down whenever I thought I was all too special. After the presentation and the subsequent after work, I was exhausted. I collapsed in my hotel room and slipped into a dreamless sleep. I prayed it would pass quickly so I could get to my car and just go home. I lay there with my eyes closed and waited for the anxious voice to quiet down. You know, the one that keeps telling you how much you've done wrong. That voice. "James in accounting got 3 business cards. Lauren got 2. Why didn't you get any?" "They were slow on clapping. He messed up the ending." The next day, I packed, skipped breakfast, and threw myself in the shower. I wasn't wasting another second if I didn't have to, and I had a 7-hour drive to go. I didn't dare to use the hotel shampoo, or I might end up with a skin condition, so I always brought my own. As I rinsed off, I felt this electric pain shooting up my shoulder blade. I couldn't raise my arm without something snagging the muscle. My pulse shot up, making me think I was having some kind of episode. But it slowed as I mentally checked myself. I could see, taste, and hear just fine. Not even a tingle in my fingertips. There was just this unusual pain. I reached back and could feel a warmth with my fingers. It was just out of reach, so I stepped in front of the mirror. At just the right angle, I could see an inflamed patch of skin on the back of my left shoulder blade. There was a bulge to it, and I could see little strands of red reach out to the sides. I'd had stress reactions before, especially as a kid, but this was something new. Then again, I'd never been as stressed as I'd been the previous day. If I had to pick between a bruise on my shoulder and hundreds of judgmental people, I'll pick the bruise all day, every day. I figured I'd get it checked out if it wasn't gone in a day or two. I must have slept weird. And yet, that anxious voice in my mind couldn't help but add 2 cents. Maybe they saw it. Maybe they were disgusted. Maybe they think you're sick. Contagious. Maybe that's why you didn't get any business cards. Gross. I slipped out just before 8 a.m. My phone kept beeping with corporate updates. Someone thanking us for attending. HR reminding us to send in travel and gas receipts. Reminders to check the weekly newsletter. Armand telling me he'd have a better laptop ready for me Monday morning. I turned it all off. It wasn't until I was back on the road that I could finally relax. I could listen to what I wanted, at whatever volume I wanted. I could control my space. I was okay. I'd finished this, despite dreading it for months. There would be no more mandatory corporate outings for months. And next time, someone else would have to hold the presentation. But over the next couple of hours, that spot on my shoulder blade would make itself known. Whenever I took an awkward left turn or stretched a little too long, that ache would shoot through my arm like I touched a candle. And with it, my worries would flare up. It wasn't good enough. They're gonna get rid of you. You should have stayed for breakfast. Now they know there's something wrong with you. But I made it home. I settled into my space, made some time for friends and family, and healed. Monday was just around the corner. The following work week wasn't that unusual. 2 meetings, lunchroom talk, customer satisfaction surveys, and being told to smile despite nothing ever being good enough. Thinly veiled beneath corpo speak of room for improvement, striving for perfection, and being oriented for change. It's like being home for Christmas. All through the week, that spot on my shoulder blade got worse. It had started with a mild swelling, like a bug bite. A warm little spot no bigger than a fingernail. Now it had grown to the size of a thumb, and I could feel it throbbing. I started sleeping on my other side. I'd made an appointment with the company doctor, but it wasn't an emergency, so it had been scheduled for a week from now. By the time I finally got to see a physician, the growth was the size of a golf ball. It was protruding from the skin, like a hard mass. I was brought in for some tests. Blood work, mostly. A couple of questionnaires about recent events. They checked my throat, did some mobility testing, and poked a couple of nerves. As we wrapped up, I was brought into a small office with an older woman in a white coat. I'd never seen her before, but figured she was a company affiliate. This was all paid for by our insurance premium. "It says in your chart you have family history in St. Gall," she said. "Can you fill me in on that?" "Is that relevant?" I asked. "It could be," she continued. "There are a couple of environmental factors we need to exclude. Mostly allergens." "My mom's from St. Gall," I said. "I only lived there a couple years before we moved to Minneapolis." "I see," she said. "Then I think we have our answer." She called it polygenic helianthic encapsulation, a stress reaction that can flare up in individuals with a certain combination of genes. It mostly happens to rural folk living near the Rockies, but there were a couple of people in rural Minnesota that also carried the gene. It was unusual, and even more unusual for it to flare up like mine had. The reaction was carried by a stress trigger. "It's going to come down on its own," she said. "We'll get you cortisol cream, and you promise not to poke and prod it. The ache will come and go, but the swelling should subside within a couple of weeks." "And if it doesn't?" I asked. "Well, then we have to take another look. I was sent home with what was, in effect, a doctor's note for people to be extra nice to me at the office. Since the PHE was a result of stress, there was talk of prescribing me beta blockers, but I didn't want to rely too heavily on medication if I didn't have to. It felt nice to have the option, though. I tried to keep going as normal. I could feel a little chafing here and there when I leaned back too far in my seat, or when I absent-mindedly reached for a cup of coffee. It was always at the most inopportune times, and whenever I felt a sting of pain, I'd look up to see worried faces turning my way. Armand had set me up with a new laptop. Got most of the company software on it so I could work from home for a couple days if necessary. I could have kissed him. It was exactly what I needed. After a nerve-wracking discussion with my supervisor, I was given the green light to take some time away from the office. Of course, he wasn't happy with it. "He's already looking for a replacement," whispered the voice in the back of my head. "You're being a nuisance. That laptop is full of spyware." It was nonsense, but it was nonsense that wouldn't go away. So I began working from home. I carved out a home office space in my bedroom and made a colored chart to help me organize myself hour by hour. Simple, but essential stuff. I could almost stomach the constant meetings and endless torrent of emails now, knowing I was safe in a space of my own. But even so, at the end of the day, that growth kept getting worse. It ached a bit more, and I could feel it all the way into my biceps. There was even the shadow of an ache when I turned my wrist a bit too fast. But, as the doctor had said, it would get a little worse before it got better. I just had to be patient. I decided to take a sick day. I took care of my plants, watched some episodes of a show I'd been putting off, and took a long walk, ending the day with a chicken wrap from the place down on the street corner. Not a care in the world. For a little while. And yet, the growth got bigger. I tried booking a new appointment, but the doctor said we had to wait for the encapsulation to reach the peak. There was little they could do without intervening surgery, and that would most likely cost me some mobility in my arm. It was an option, but we weren't there yet. We booked another checkup a week down the line, hoping things had leveled out a bit by then. I noticed how the growth seemed to increase at random. Some days I'd feel like crap and it wouldn't move an inch. Other days I could be doing perfectly fine, and it grew by a full inch. I started to use a marker to track the growth, but it was difficult to see in the bathroom mirror. But there had to be some kind of trigger. It wasn't just stress. That much was clear. There was something else causing it to grow. I began doing regular checks during the day. Turns out it didn't grow steadily all the time. It happened in bursts. And it didn't just happen when I was stressed either. I could be perfectly fine and still have it grow. At first, I thought it had something to do with my eating habits, or dehydration. But that wasn't it either. It didn't correlate to lunch hours or when I had a cup of coffee. It didn't correlate with stress either. The only common denominator was our meetings. It always grew whenever I was in a video call. But that wasn't the only time it grew. It almost always grew whenever I went outside, and sometimes when I just went to the kitchen for a refill. I made a long list of actions and possible exposures I could have experienced during those times of the day, turning a fresh page on my colored hour chart. It wasn't sunshine, humidity, bad or good weather. It wasn't being inside or outside. The only thing it seemed to react to was other people. I experimented with this a little more. It wasn't entirely consistent. I could chat with people just fine or answer emails. I could also take phone calls. But as soon as I got into a video call or talked to a real person, it grew. So it wasn't just being near other people. It was about being seen. I've heard about things reacting to being observed. How it changes things. But this was on a completely different level. I figured the growth had been some kind of buildup because of my disastrous presentation, and that it siphoned off a kind of hormone. Maybe something in my system got clogged from the massive stress. I figured I'd present my theory to the doctor at our next meeting. The second time I went to talk to that elderly woman in the white coat, I told her all about my theory. I showed her my schedule, my measurements, and explained why I thought this was the answer. She humored me, but didn't seem all that engaged. After all, there were a few points of data I'd excluded. "It's interesting," she said. "But then why does it still grow during these periods?" She pointed to one of my charts. The growth still increased in size when I slept, and sometimes when I was just watching TV before going to bed. It would also increase at seemingly random times throughout the day. "You need to account for that too," she continued. "And I think there's a variable we're not seeing." "Can't we test this?" I asked. "Isn't there something we can do?" "We can, but it'll be gone long before we get a conclusive answer." The growth was the size of half a cantaloupe by then. It would radiate this intense heat through my entire back. I could feel my pulse through my skin. I had to compensate the weight by leaning to the right, giving me a lopsided walk, which just made things worse. I could swear I felt it growing when people looked at me, and the more it grew, the stranger I looked. It was this weird, never-ending cycle. The doctor had it x-rayed. I managed to sneak a peek of her discussing the growth with a colleague. I saw the image briefly before they took it off the wall. But from what I could see, it wasn't just empty. It looked like a sprawling web of nerves. It wasn't just a ball of pus. You couldn't poke a hole in it. It was a collection of little things, all combined into one. They didn't discuss their findings with me, and I wasn't allowed to see the results of the scan. But they still insisted that things were going to work out just fine. I just needed to be calm, confident, and patient. But they ended the meeting by giving me an emergency number. If the growth burst, or I suddenly felt very ill, I was to call that number. "Not the emergency services," the elderly doctor clarified. "You call this number." Leaving the hospital with that number in hand, the voice in the back of my head was clearer than ever. "They're not telling you everything. They want something for themselves. You can't trust them." I was told to take some time off work. Not just a day, but substantial time. It was even recommended by the company doctor. So my boss had no choice but to comply. We started with 2 weeks, then we would reevaluate. It didn't matter what the doctor said about triggers, though, or about potential exposure. The growth kept growing no matter what I did. Some of it must have correlated with being seen. It had to. I decided to put it to a practical test. I watched the growth in the bathroom mirror and drew the edges of it with a marker. That way I could see how much it had grown after what I was about to do. I went down to the chicken wrap place on the corner during lunch hour. There was a line reaching all the way out the door. I'd covered up the growth with a hoodie, but it was getting harder to hide it. At the very least, you could see something was off just with the way I leaned. I got to the counter, ordered an iced coffee and a wrap, paid, and turned to leave. As I did, I willingly hit my foot on the side of an empty table. I fell forward, spilling lettuce, chicken, and iced coffee all over the floor. It looked a bit more dramatic than I'd expected, but it certainly caused a scene. Dozens of people stared me down. But what I noticed the most wasn't their stares. It was the voice in the back of my head. It was fuming, growing louder. "They will never look at you the same way. They'll sigh every time you come back here. They'll recognize you. They'll loathe you." I looked up to see concerned faces. One of the baristas rounded the corner to help me up. "You're pathetic," the voice continued. "Bothering others just to sate your curiosity." Despite the harsh thoughts, a hand reached out to me, and I got up. They got me a new wrap, and I was on my way back home, away from prying eyes. "I wouldn't eat that," said the voice. You have no idea what they've done to it. And with that, it went in the trash. The growth was bigger. That much was for certain. But it didn't grow as fast as it did at seemingly random times of the day. About 1/4 of an inch in total. It was something, but it wasn't as explosive as I'd suspected. You made a fool of yourself for nothing, the voice reminded me. But I didn't know what to do. I wanted to make sense of things, and I wanted to be okay. There had to be some reason why I was feeling the way I did. There had to be a reason why I was weighed down by this thing, growing by the day. What was the end point? The only thing my stunt accomplished was making my doubts louder. I've always been careful about making assumptions, and this was feeding into that uncertainty. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, getting ready for sleep. It was getting to me. It's still growing, the voice in my head reminded me. I know, I said out loud. It was the first time I spoke to it out loud, but it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't even question it. Ready to listen? It continued. I always listen, I mumbled, whether I like it or not. Dangling your feet, talking to yourself. What would they think? I don't care. Yes, you do. And it was right. I cared. I just wanted to blend in. I didn't want any more stares. I kept having this dream of being put in a cage, naked, far up in the air. I couldn't cover myself. No matter how I twisted and turned, someone could find an angle. In that dream, there were growths all over me. Some big, some small, all painful. The people down below would point as my cage dangled in the wind. They'd laugh at how I jiggled and squirmed. I had that dream every night for a full week. I'd wake up feeling exposed, to the point where I didn't dare to shower, in case I'd catch a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I told the doctor I didn't care if my nerves got damaged. I had to get the growth out. But even so, they had to schedule me for a final consultation, and the only available time was 2 weeks later. I pulled down all the curtains. I ordered home food. I ate microwave food in the dark, afraid that the light of my computer screen might cast a reflection I couldn't stomach. I tried reminding myself it would be okay eventually, but it was getting harder and harder to convince myself. Until one night. I sat on the edge of my bed, dangling my legs. The growth was the size of a head. I had to start sleeping on my stomach. It was big enough that it took some time for my heartbeat to reach all the way through it, making this double pulse through my body. Once when it reached the growth, another when it left. Despite all my efforts, it kept growing. I can make sense of it, the voice suggested. You will never listen. I'm tired, I wheezed. I can help you. Whatever. I fell face first into my favorite pillow, letting it drink my sweat. I had to pull my covers up a little extra to account for the growth, making a tent-like shape on my back. I closed my eyes. You should move your computer out of your bedroom, it whispered. What? I told you it was full of spyware, the voice said. You didn't listen. I opened my eyes. It was plausible. I'd moved my computer into the bedroom the moment I started working from home. That's stupid. Then test it, the voice suggested. You're good at testing. I made one final effort. I drew the edges of the growth with a marker. I covered up my computer and my phone with blankets and moved them into the kitchen. Then I went to sleep. The next day, the growth was the same size. For the first time, it hadn't expanded overnight. You're right, I mumbled in the bathroom mirror. This is it. I told you, the voice said. You never listened to me. Let's try that then, I muttered. Let's try to listen. I could feel my anxiety easing, my feet growing lighter, a soft breeze cooling the sweat on my back. We were in agreement. I was going to listen. I turned off all electronics. I kept the curtains down. I measured. And the growth didn't expand in the slightest. I could confirm that it did seemingly grow whenever I was seen. It fed on being seen. It also exposed that I was being seen even when I didn't know it. Armand must have put something in there. He must have had a remote connection to the laptop camera. The moment I began working from home, he'd taken advantage of it. But I couldn't just confront him with it either. He could remove all traces. A growth on my back was hardly evidence. We'll expose him ourselves, the voice said. You have all the access you need. They can see I've been there. Only if they have reason to look. So one day, after the office closed, I dressed up in a big hoodie and made my way there. I had to drive carefully, since I could hardly use my left arm anymore. Walking was a chore, and running was out of the picture. I dug my old phone out of the closet so I could use it to take pictures without risking someone watching me. The voice had said it was fine, and I trusted it well enough. I took some time avoiding large streets and made my way to the office. I parked at the end of the lot and gave some of the late stragglers a wide berth, so as not to recognize me from a distance. I scanned my card at the front door and took a left turn down the steps to the basement. A dark corridor lit up, blending the small green and red diodes from the server hall with a neutral fluorescent light. I don't know what to look for, I mumbled. I don't know this stuff. Sure you do, the voice said. You've worked with these people for years. I looked around. There were 2 small offices, one for Armand and one for our junior technician. Both were empty and locked. I placed my hand on Armand's door and jiggled it a little. There was a rattle. I'd always thought that the bathroom doors on the 3rd floor, where I usually worked, were too flimsy. These were the same kind of doors. I knew exactly how to bypass that lock. It was just a matter of lifting the door a little and tapping the handle to the left. I did, and it worked. Told you, my inner voice gloated. You got this. A pulse shot through my shoulder, forcing me to stop. I had to take a deep breath. The sudden ache caught me breathless, like a punch to the gut. I wasn't okay. Maybe I was delusional. The growth was pulsating, moving. But I had to push through. I couldn't quit now. Armand had his work computer set up and ready. He usually left it on so he wouldn't have to start it up in the morning. Besides, there were probably diagnostic tools and backups running. But the screen was locked, and I wasn't getting through anytime soon. The trail ended there. I need a password, I mumbled. It's not going to be written down. They don't do that. Maybe it's your name, the voice suggested. I tried and failed. That wasn't it. It couldn't be. There was no way he was that obsessed. Even if he was, that would just be dumb. Maybe it's your last name, it kept suggesting, but with zeros instead of O's. But of course, that wasn't it either. I checked the room. There were cables running in the corners, all labeled and secured. But a couple of labels were a bit strange. For example, one named Offsite Stream Buffer. It was an audio-video feed, but unrelated to the surveillance footage from the building. I went back out into the hall outside of Armand's office, and felt that ache again. It got worse. My vision blurred, and I could feel a veil clouding my mind. I tried to shake it off, but it was getting to me. Push a little further, the voice said. You're on the right track. Oh, this was a stupid idea, I muttered. You're throwing me to the goddamn wolves. I'm helping you. You just don't want to be helped. I opened the door to the server room with the same lift and jiggle as before. The lights were off. Powerful fans kept the room cool, leaving the dazzling red and green from the various machines to twinkle like distant stars. My head felt heavy. The growth was swelling. I reached for my old phone and tried to think of the emergency number the doctor had given me, just in case. But with my old phone in hand, I tripped. I fell flat on my stomach, smacking my head into the cold ceramic tiles. The growth was large enough I could see it lying down. I couldn't get up. And that double pulse I'd been feeling was clearer now. It wasn't just a delay. It was a completely different beat. It had a heartbeat, and it was different than mine. I mumbled to myself, feeling my body grow warm and dull. I wasn't tired, but I couldn't stay awake. Consciousness was slipping. Not now, I mumbled. Not now. I blinked, trying to keep my focus. Then, the growth moved. I held my breath, listening to the whir of machines. Then it happened, all without a sound. Black spikes pierced my hoodie, bursting through my skin. Not an explosion, but a hatching. There was no blood. Something sticky running down the sleeve of my arm. Something moving, getting tangled in the fabric. And the moment my nerves realized what was happening, my mind escaped to that space beyond sleep. Lights out. When I woke up, I was propped up against one of the server cabins. Armand was there, looking down at me. He'd been running. Maybe he'd spotted me on the surveillance cameras. Maybe he had an extra in his office. What the fuck happened to you? He asked. There was no voice in my head to tell me what to say anymore. No guidance, no counsel, not even a scolding. It was quiet. I could feel my exposed shoulder. The fluids on my back had cooled, giving me a feverish shiver. I figured you out, I smiled. I know what you're doing. You're insane, he said, shaking his head. I'll call someone. He picked up his phone and started to dial a number. There was a glimpse of doubt in me. Maybe this had all just been lie after lie after lie. A way for whatever had been clinging to me to justify its existence. Or maybe it wasn't. I looked up at Armand and cleared my throat. Off-site stream buffer. He paused. He turned to me and shook his head, fumbling for the right words. When he couldn't find them, he shrugged. I should have picked someone less fucking paranoid. I tried to get up, but my muscles backfired. My nerves were trying to make sense of what had happened, and I'd lost most, if not all, sensation in my left arm and legs. Even my neck kept swiveling like I'd been on a bender. I suppose you have to go away, Armand said. Sorry about that. He fetched a couple of cables from one of the supply closets and bent down. He tied up my legs. I could see it, but I couldn't feel a thing. I tried to move, but all I did was topple over. You're not very good at this, he continued. Not much of a fighter. You don't know shit about me. Oh, I know more than you think. He smiled. And so do about 5,000 anonymous donors. You're kind of fun, you know? The words echoed in my mind, reverberating into a cold sweat. 5,000? Was that a real number? All these people watching me. What had they seen? They probably had my name and address. I couldn't think straight. And for once, there was no voice in the back of my mind to make things worse. I didn't spiral. Not this time. But it was too late. It made sense. This was what made it grow at random times. Someone tuning in to watch. Armand tied up my legs and wrists. He tried to move me, but when he put his hand on my shoulder, he had to step back. Something stuck to the palm of his hand. The fuck are you, half snail? He fumbled through his pocket, looking for a wet wipe and some hand sanitizer. He had some trouble using it single-handedly, and made this awkward little dance trying to figure out how to hold it with his elbow. But it was finally sinking in. This goofy, harmless-looking nobody was gonna make me disappear. He'd probably strangle me to death with a Cat 4 cable and drop me off on the side of the highway, or bury me in a shallow grave. The fighting was over before it began. I'd lost the moment I walked down these stairs. I'd always figured death would come from somewhere stupid. Somewhere I could have avoided. I'd been afraid of everything from wasps to almost expired cheese, and what would get me killed turned out to be the one time I acted with confidence. That's all it took. One step in the wrong direction. I couldn't accept this. My heart raced, but no matter how I twisted and turned, all the strength in me had died. I was exposed and vulnerable. At any other time and day, I would have stood a chance. But now, I was a sitting duck. Armand wiped his hands and threw away the wet wipe. I thought his face would look different the moment he decided he was going to murder me, but it looked the same as always when he turned to me. Maybe he always knew he wanted to do this. Something plopped down on the floor. Something dark, not much larger than a finger. Armand stepped on it and almost slipped. Disgusting, he said. What did you... Another plopped down. And another. Looking up, the ceiling was covered in them. Little dark things, sticking to the ceiling. I told you, a voice echoed. He wants to hurt you. Wants to kill you, another chimed in. Wants to make you a plaything. His plaything. Everyone's plaything. He thinks he's clever, something added with a laugh. His mother said he was clever. He sleeps alone, and it hurts him. It hurts him so much. Armand turned left and right, looking around. His eyes were going wild. I realized that he was hearing it too. That voice inside my head had burst out, and it was crawling across the ceiling. My anxiety, my pain, every intrusive thought I'd ever had, given flesh and intent. And as they fell from the ceiling, he could only brush off so many before they were on him. I could see them moving and squirming to get under his clothes. Some of them had spikes in front. Others had spikes along the ridge of a circling spine. They weren't exactly snakes or worms. They were more like long sea urchins. They had this musculature where they could move their skin one way and their bones another. There must have been 100 of them, crawling all over, piercing his skin and pinching his nerves. He made it all the way out the door, then collapsed in the hallway outside. Armand didn't scream. It was more of a painful mewling, a sad groan, growing longer and quieter. He crawled pretty far, but it didn't stop them. I could hear every spike puncturing the skin, like stabbing an orange with a sharp pencil. And after a while, it was quiet. But for the hum of the servers. A dark mass gathered in front of me, little dark things crawling on top of one another, arranging themselves into a colony, like the one that had lived inside me. The doctors must have known. I can't hear you anymore, I said. It's quiet. Dozens of voices, all using slight variations and different words, all amounting to the same thing. I was a good listener. "Is it over?" I asked. "Are you going away?" And this time, the answer was unequivocal. Yes. I closed my eyes, hoping my body would find the strength to recover. I could feel the careful wriggle of 100 little things, curling up against the edge of me, like a cat settling into its owner's lap. A part of me knew they'd be gone by morning. And they were. It was the junior technician that found us. I have no idea what he must have thought, but he called security. From there, it escalated. The authorities deemed it as self-defense, a puncture wound from a pen, straight to Armand's neck. Of course, they knew it was hundreds, if not thousands, of wounds. But somehow, the report looked different from reality. It didn't even mention how I couldn't have done it, as I was tied up the moment he died. There were also cameras, which had conveniently stopped recording. I was asked surprisingly few questions, and most of them were leading. The officer in charge more or less spelled it out for me. "And that's when he attacked you, right? And then you picked up this pen, right? And you had no choice but to fight back, right?" They made the story for me. I didn't have to say much. Just nod and sign the paper. The final checkup with the doctor was quick. The skin on my back was intact. There was only the outline of a sac where the growth had been. They cut the excess skin off, and I didn't feel a thing. I was perfectly normal from that point on. At least, physically. I wanted to tell them about the mass, and the many dark things. But it was implied that they already knew. Perhaps it would have been worse to stop it. Maybe our medical professionals know something we don't. Before we went our separate ways, I decided to ask, "What did you do with them?" And the old doctor looked at me. "We put them back in the ocean," she said. "That's where they come from." I suppose bad things happen to people all the time, but we all react differently. I think I will always be the kind of person to assume the worst and take measures to avoid it. No matter if a voice tells me to or not. It's just the way I was built. But as I once heard, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not watching. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.